Hannah Kim felt the cold metal floor beneath her feet as she stepped off the transport shuttle. Her old backpack hung loosely on her shoulder, the same one she had carried through high school back on Earth. The weight felt like nothing to her, but she noticed how the alien students around her struggled with bags half that size. The university platform stretched out before her like a giant crystal palace. Everything sparkled and glowed with soft light. She had seen pictures, but being here in person was different. The air smelled strange, like flowers mixed with metal. Her breathing felt easy, almost too easy. She remembered reading that they kept the atmosphere light for most species' comfort. As she walked forward, the crowd of students seemed to part around her like water. She wasn't trying to push through or look intimidating. She was just walking normally, the same way she walked to classes back home. But here, her simple movement made everyone step back. A group of blue-skinned students huddled together near an information display. Their skin looked smooth like dolphin skin, and they had tentacles instead of arms. One of them pointed at her with a shaky tentacle. "That's her," he whispered, but his voice carried in the quiet space. "That's the human." His friend's eyes went wide. "I heard they come from a death planet. The gravity there crushes bones. My cousin studied their world," another one added, his voice barely audible. "He said the air itself is poison to most life forms. Too much oxygen." Hannah pretended not to hear them, but their words made her feel strange. Back home, Earth was just Earth. Sure, it had storms and earthquakes, but that was normal life. She had never thought of her home as a death planet before. A tall insectoid student clicked past her. His legs moved like a praying mantis, all sharp angles and careful steps. His head turned toward her with compound eyes that reflected the crystal light. She smiled at him out of politeness, but he immediately skittered away, his claws clicking frantically on the floor. "Did you see that?" He buzzed to his companion in their clicking language. She showed her teeth. "That's a threat display." Hannah's smile faded. On Earth, smiling meant being friendly. Here it seemed to mean something scary. More students filled the platform as shuttles arrived. There were so many different types of beings. Some floated instead of walking. Others had multiple arms or legs or both. A few looked like walking. Crystals, their bodies catching and bending light in beautiful patterns. But no matter how different they all were from each other, they all had one thing in common. They all avoided her. The whispers followed her like a shadow. Deathworld species. Gravity monsters. Bone crushers. Each word made her feel more alone in this crowd of hundreds. She found a spot near the back of the gathering area and set down her backpack. The simple action of placing it on the ground made a small thud that seemed loud in the nervous quiet around her. Several nearby students jumped at the sound. Professor Thek approached the speaking platform at the center. He was one of the crystal beings, but unlike the students, he moved with confidence. His body was made of what looked like golden amber, and light passed through him in warm, honey-colored rays. When he walked, his feet made soft, musical sounds on the crystal floor. "Welcome, new students, to Kepler University," his voice rang, out clear and musical. "This institution has stood for 3,000 years as a beacon of learning for all civilized species in the galaxy." Hannah listened carefully. His words sounded welcoming, but something in his tone felt cold. "We pride ourselves on acceptance and understanding," Professor Thek continued. "We accommodate beings from many worlds, even those from particularly challenging environments." His faceted eyes turned toward her section of the crowd. "Some species require special consideration due to their more primitive evolutionary paths." The words hit her like a slap. Primitive. She had graduated top of her class. She had earned her place here through merit, just like everyone else. But to him she was primitive. She shifted in her seat and stretched her fingers, trying to relax the tension building in her shoulders. Her knuckles made their usual soft popping sound. Back home, it was nothing. Just a normal thing people did when they were nervous or stretching. But here in the crystal quiet of the auditorium, the sound echoed like small firecrackers going off. Every alien within 20 seats of her flinched visibly. Some dove behind their chairs. Others scrambled to move further away. She looked down at her hands, confused. They were just normal hands doing a normal thing. But apparently even her most basic human actions were terrifying here. Professor Theck's glowing form dimmed slightly as he noticed the disturbance, his eyes fixed on her with what looked like disapproval. "As I was saying," he continued, his voice sharper now, "we shall see how well various species adapt to true academic rigor." Hana sat perfectly still for the rest of the orientation, afraid that any movement might cause more fear, but inside she felt a growing determination. She would show them that humans weren't just scary monsters from a death world. She would prove that she belonged here through her work and her mind. She just hoped she could do it without accidentally terrifying everyone first. The classroom felt different on the third day. Hana had noticed how the other students arranged themselves as far from her as possible. What started as a few empty seats around her had grown into an entire section of vacant chairs. She sat alone in her corner, taking notes while Professor Theck began his daily lecture. "Today we examine the fundamental limitations of biological intelligence," Professor Theck announced, his amber form glowing brighter as he warmed to his favorite topic. "Certain species, particularly those from harsh environments, develop physical strength at the expense of mental capacity. This is a well-documented evolutionary trade-off." Hana looked up from her notebook. She had heard variations of this speech every day since classes started. Each time his crystal eyes would drift toward her section of the room. Each time the message became clearer. "Consider the primitive mammals of various death worlds," he continued, manipulating the holographic display with elegant gestures. "Their brains allocate enormous resources to survival instincts, pain tolerance, threat assessment, physical coordination. This leaves little room for higher cognitive functions." A tentacled student in the front row raised an appendage. "Professor, are you saying they cannot learn complex subjects?" "Oh, they can memorize," Professor Theck replied with what sounded like amusement. "Much like how a trained animal can perform tricks. But true understanding, scientific innovation, the neural architecture simply isn't there." Hana felt her jaw tighten. She had been accepted to this university based on her research into quantum biology. Her thesis on cellular energy transfer had impressed the admissions board enough to offer her a full scholarship. But according to her professor, she was basically a trained animal. She looked around the classroom. The other students were nodding along with the lecture. Some were taking notes on everything Professor Theck said. A few glanced in her direction with what looked like pity. "Let's examine quantum cellular manipulation," Professor Theck said, bringing up a complex molecular structure on the display. "This represents the cutting edge of biological research. The mathematical concepts involved require neural pathways that develop only in species, with sufficient evolutionary pressure toward intelligence." The structure floating in the hologram looked familiar to Hana. She had seen something similar in her Earth biology classes, but there were differences. The molecular bonds were arranged in an older pattern, one that researchers had moved beyond years ago. The probability that primitive mammals could comprehend such advanced concepts is essentially zero, Professor Theck declared. Their brains lack the necessary architecture for quantum-level thinking. Hana raised her hand slowly. The simple motion caused several students to turn and stare. She had not spoken in class before, and her silence had let Professor Theck's comments go unchallenged. "Yes?" Professor Theck's voice carried a note of surprise. "Professor, I think there might be an error in your display," Hana said carefully. "That molecular structure shows the pre-2157 classification system that Earth researchers used before we discovered quantum tunneling effects." The classroom went completely silent, not the normal quiet of students listening, but the dead silence of shock. Every alien in the room turned to stare at her. Professor Theck's crystalline form seemed to lose some of its glow. "Excuse me?" "The structure you're showing," Hana continued, pulling out her datapad. "We found out that those cells actually undergo quantum tunneling at the mitochondrial level. The energy transfer happens differently than what your model shows." She could feel the weight of dozens of alien eyes on her. Some students had stopped breathing entirely. Others were whispering in languages she didn't recognize. "Impossible," Professor Theck said, his voice sharp as breaking glass. "Your species lacks the neural complexity for such discoveries." What you're describing would require understanding of quantum mechanics at the cellular level. Would you like me to show you the calculations? Hannah asked politely, already opening her datapad. I have the research files from Earth's Quantum Biology Institute. Professor Thek floated closer to her desk, his amber form casting strange shadows. You're claiming that primitive mammals from a Deathworld have made discoveries that elude our finest researchers? I'm not claiming anything, Hannah replied, keeping her voice steady. I'm just showing you what we found. She turned her datapad toward the class display and uploaded her files. Complex equations filled the hologram, showing energy pathways and quantum probability maps. The calculations were dense, filled with symbols and formulas that made several students look away in confusion. But Professor Thek studied them carefully. His crystalline features shifted as he read through the data. Other students leaned forward, trying to follow the math. These calculations are correct, an insectoid student whispered to his neighbor. Look at the quantum coherence. Values. How is that possible? Another replied. Professor Thek's form dimmed further as he reached the end of the equations. The proof was right there in front of him. Not only were the calculations correct, but they showed a level of understanding that went beyond what he had been teaching. Where did you get this research? He asked, his voice quieter now. I helped write some of it, Hannah said simply. During my final year of high school, I worked with Dr. Park at the Institute. This was part of my graduation project. The revelation hit the classroom like a wave. A high school project. What Professor Thek had called impossible for primitive mammals to understand had been figured out by a human teenager. Your graduation project, Professor Thek repeated slowly. Yes, sir. We were studying why human cells are so efficient compared to most life forms. It turns out the quantum effects help us process energy faster. That's probably part of why we can handle high gravity and thick atmosphere. The professor stared at the display, then at Hannah, then back at the display. His entire lecture about primitive intelligence had just been dismantled by the very species he claimed couldn't think at an advanced level. The other students began whispering more urgently. Some were pulling up their own datapads, trying to verify the calculations. Others were simply staring at Hannah with new expressions. Not fear this time, but something closer to awe. Professor Thek straightened his crystalline form and cleared his throat. Class dismissed, he announced abruptly. We will continue this discussion next time. As students filed out, many of them glanced back at Hannah with curious looks. The whispers had changed too. Instead of primitive and Deathworld monster, she heard quantum biology and high school project, but she also noticed Professor Thek's amber glow had turned a darker shade. His faceted eyes followed her as she packed up her things. Something told her that challenging him in front of the class had not been the end of this situation. The tension in Professor Thek's classroom had been building for 2 weeks straight. Every day, Hannah would walk in quietly, sit in her isolated corner, and proceed to excel at everything thrown at her. What made it worse for Professor Thek was how effortless she made it look. During the first week, he had assigned extra homework, specifically for her. Complex problems that should have taken hours to solve. She turned them in the next day, completed perfectly, with additional notes suggesting improvements to the original questions. The second week, he had tried pop quizzes, sudden tests on material he hadn't covered yet, hoping to catch her unprepared. She scored perfect marks every time, often finishing before other students had even read through all the questions. Today's exam was supposed to be his masterstroke. Theoretical bioengineering was the most challenging subject in the curriculum. The test covered advanced concepts that most students struggled with even after months of preparation. He had designed it to be nearly impossible, expecting even his best students to barely pass. Hannah had finished in 43 minutes. The exam was supposed to take 2 hours. Professor Thek watched from his desk as other students sweated over their papers, scratching out wrong answers and starting over. Tentacles twisted in frustration. Compound eyes darted between questions. Crystal beings dimmed with the effort of concentration. But there sat the human girl, calmly reviewing her notebook as if she had all the time in the world. She had turned in her exam pad and returned to reading about next week's material. While her classmates struggled with today's impossible test, she was already studying topics that wouldn't be covered for another month. The crystalline professor's amber form grew darker with each passing minute. His carefully crafted exam, designed to humble the most advanced students in the galaxy, had been completed by a primitive mammal in less than an hour. When the time limit ended, Professor Thek collected the exam pads with sharp, angry movements. His crystal fingers clicked against the devices as he gathered them. Other students looked exhausted, drained by the mental effort. "Results will be posted tomorrow," he announced, though he had already graded Hana's exam. Perfect score. Again, as students filed out, Professor Thek called out, "Miss Kim, please remain behind." Hana looked up from her notebook, where she had been working on problems from an advanced physics textbook she had brought from Earth. "Yes, Professor." The classroom emptied until only the two of them remained. Professor Thek's crystalline form caught the artificial light as he moved closer to her desk. His faceted features were twisted into an expression that might have been anger or frustration or both. "Miss Kim," he said, his voice sharp as breaking glass, "I find it difficult to believe that a Deathworld primitive could achieve such results without assistance." The words hung in the air between them. Hana closed her notebook slowly and looked up at him with calm eyes. She had been expecting this conversation for days. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Professor," she said quietly. "Sorry." Professor Thek's voice rose an octave. "You complete my most challenging exam in half the allotted time with perfect scores. And you're sorry that I find it suspicious?" "I'm sorry that you think I'm cheating," Hana clarified, her tone still even. "But I'm not." "Prove it," he demanded, moving closer to her desk. "Show me your work. Show me how a primitive brain from a savage world can outthink students who have trained their entire lives for this moment." Hana reached for her datapad, but Professor Thek was faster. His crystalline arm shot out toward the device, intending to snatch it from her hands and examine it for evidence of cheating programs or hidden assistance. "Show me your work now," he repeated, his arm extending toward her datapad. It was a simple movement, the kind of thing that happened in classrooms. Everywhere, a teacher reaching for a student's work. On most worlds, with most species, it would have been completely harmless. But Hana wasn't from most worlds. Without even looking away from her notebook, she casually reached out to intercept his grab. It was an automatic response, the same way she might reach out to steady a friend who was stumbling or catch a falling object. Her fingers closed gently around his crystalline forearm, with what felt like the lightest possible touch. The crack was audible throughout the classroom. The sound echoed off the walls like a gunshot. Professor Thek's crystalline arm, which had evolved to handle the low-gravity, low-pressure environment of his homeworld, simply couldn't withstand the casual grip of fingers that had developed under Earth's crushing gravity. Professor Thek's shriek of pain shattered the silence that followed. The sound was unlike anything Hana had ever heard, like wind whistling through broken glass mixed with the cry of an injured animal. Golden fluid began leaking from the fracture in his arm, dripping onto the floor in bright droplets. "Oh no," Hana said, her eyes going wide with horror. "Oh no, I'm so sorry." She was still sitting in her chair, her hand now hovering near the professor's broken arm. She hadn't stood up, hadn't used any force that felt significant to her. It had been the gentlest possible touch, the same pressure she might use to tap someone on the shoulder. But Professor Thek was writhing in agony, clutching his shattered limb as more golden fluid leaked between his crystal fingers. His amber glow flickered like a dying light bulb. "I didn't mean to," Hana said, finally standing up. "I was just trying to stop you from grabbing my pad. I barely touched you." Professor Thek looked up at her through his pain, and for the first time since she had arrived at the university, Hana saw something other than disdain in an alien's eyes when they looked at her. She saw fear, pure, absolute terror. Because now, he understood what everyone had been whispering about. The human girl hadn't been trying to intimidate anyone. She hadn't been showing off or making threats. She had simply been existing in a world that was built for beings far more fragile than herself, and her gentlest touch was enough to shatter bones. The door burst open, as other students, drawn by the professor's screams, peered inside. They saw their teacher collapsed on the floor, his arm broken cleanly in two, while the human girl stood over him looking genuinely distressed. Word spread through the university in minutes. The primitive Deathworld mammal had casually broken their professor's arm without even standing up, and she had been trying to be gentle. The emergency alarm echoed through the crystalline corridors of Kepler University within seconds of Professor Thek's scream. Hannah stood frozen beside her desk, watching golden fluid pool on the classroom floor while her professor writhed in pain. She had never seen anything like it. Back on Earth, even a serious injury wouldn't produce that strange, glowing liquid. The classroom door burst open as medical staff rushed in. Dr. Vex led the team, his massive compound eyes taking in the scene immediately. He was an insectoid being, taller than most species but still shorter than Hannah. His medical scanner buzzed as he ran it over Professor Thek's shattered arm. Complete structural fracture, Dr. Vex announced to his team. The crystalline matrix has split along multiple stress points. This is severe trauma. Behind him, two floating medical assistants prepared a stretcher designed for crystal beings. They moved with practiced efficiency, clearly experienced with this type of injury. But Dr. Vex seemed puzzled as he continued his scans. How much force was applied to cause this damage? He asked, looking around the room for answers. Other students had gathered at the doorway, drawn by the commotion. Their whispers filled the hallway like buzzing insects. Hannah could hear fragments of their conversations, and none of it sounded good. She attacked the professor. I knew this would happen. Deathworld savages always turn violent. Someone should call security. Hannah felt sick to her stomach. This was exactly what she had been afraid of since arriving at the university. One accident, one misunderstanding, and now everyone would see her as a monster. Dr. Vex turned his compound eyes toward her. You were involved in this incident? I didn't mean to hurt him, Hannah said quickly. He was reaching for my data pad and I just tried to stop him. I was being gentle, I swear. As she spoke, she stood up from her chair to move closer and help. The simple action of rising to her full height sent a wave of panic through the gathered students. Several of them stumbled backward into the hallway. Others pressed themselves against the walls. At 1.7 meters tall, Hannah wasn't even considered particularly tall by human standards. She was average height for a woman her age, but here, surrounded by beings who rarely grew taller than 1.3 meters, she towered over everyone like a giant. She's huge, whispered a tentacled student. Look at the size of her hands, another replied. Those are built for crushing things. Dr. Vex studied her with his multifaceted vision, taking in details that single-eyed species would miss. You say you were being gentle? Yes, Hannah insisted. I barely touched his arm. It was like steadying. Someone who's about to trip. Interesting, Dr. Vex murmured, making notes on his medical pad. Within minutes, Security Chief Brack arrived on the scene. He was the largest being Hannah had seen at the university, a massive insectoid warrior who stood nearly as tall as she did. His armored exoskeleton gleamed under the classroom lights, and his forearms moved with military precision. What happened here? His voice rumbled like distant thunder. Dr. Vex briefed him quickly, while the medical team loaded Professor Thek onto the stretcher. The injured professor was conscious but clearly in shock, his amber glow flickering weakly. I need to review the security footage, Chief Brack announced, pulling up a holographic display from his wrist device. The classroom had multiple recording angles, standard for all university spaces. Chief Brack found the relevant timestamp and played the incident in slow motion. Everyone watched as the hologram showed Professor Thek reaching aggressively toward Hannah's desk and her casual response. There, Chief Brack said, pausing the playback. Enhance the contact point. The hologram zoomed in on Hannah's hand, touching Professor Thek's arm. Sensor data appeared alongside the image, showing pressure readings, force vectors, and impact measurements. Newtons of applied pressure, Chief Brack read from the display. That's... He paused, running calculations on his device. His compound eyes widened in what might have been surprise. That's equivalent to a human child petting a domestic animal, he finished. Silence filled the classroom. The gathered students stared at the data in disbelief. "But the professor's arm is completely broken," Dr. Vex said, confusion clear in his voice. "She wasn't even trying," Chief Brack replied, studying the readings again. This was her being as gentle as possible. Within an hour, the incident had spread across the university's entire communication network. Student forums exploded with panicked discussions and frantic research. Someone had started a thread called Human Physical Specifications that was being updated by the minute. "Human bone density, 1,900 kilograms per cubic meter," read one post. "That's 4 times denser than Kristen's skeletal structure," replied another. "Their muscle efficiency is 300% above galactic average," added a third student. "Look at this," posted someone else. "Earth gravity 9.8 meters per second squared. That force would literally crush most of our species." The numbers painted a terrifying picture. Humans had evolved under conditions that would kill most known life forms. Their bones were dense enough to withstand crushing pressure. Their muscles were efficient enough to function under impossible gravitational stress. Their reflexes were quick enough to survive in an environment filled with massive predators and natural disasters. "No wonder they call it a death world," wrote a student from the engineering department. "The humans don't just survive there, they thrive." "She broke Professor Thek's arm with less force than it takes to open a door," posted another. "What happens if she actually tries to use strength?" In her dormitory room that evening, Hannah sat on her bed reading the forum posts on her datapad. Each comment made her feel smaller and more isolated. She had come to the university to learn and make friends. Instead, she had become a walking disaster that everyone feared. Her communication device chimed with a message from Earth. It was from her mother, asking how her first weeks at university were going. Hannah stared at the message for a long time. Before typing back, "It's complicated, Mom, I'll call you tomorrow." She set the device aside and looked out her window at the alien stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, where she was just a normal girl who had never hurt anyone in her life. Here she was a monster who could accidentally kill someone with a gentle touch. The worst part was realizing that everyone had been right to be afraid of her. She was dangerous, even when she was trying her hardest not to be. But maybe, she thought, there had to be a way to use this revelation for something positive. If people were going to fear her anyway, perhaps she could find a way to earn their respect instead. Tomorrow, she decided, she would figure out how to turn being a gentle monster into something that could help rather than harm. The university had changed completely in just 2 weeks. Where once Hannah walked through empty corridors with students fleeing from her path, now she found herself surrounded by curious faces wherever she went. The fear was still there, but it had mixed with something else entirely: fascination. The Human Interaction Safety course had been Dean Kaler's idea. After the incident with Professor Thek, the university administration realized they had a problem. They had accepted their first human student without truly understanding what that meant. Now they needed to educate everyone about how to coexist safely with a being from a death world. The classroom they had chosen was the largest lecture hall on campus. Even so, it was packed beyond capacity. Students sat in the aisles, floated near the ceiling, and crowded around the doorways. Word had spread that the human was going to explain her species, and apparently everyone wanted to see it. Hannah stood at the front of the room, a demonstration table beside her loaded with various objects and equipment. She felt nervous facing so many eyes, but also oddly relieved. For the first time since arriving, people wanted to hear what she had to say instead of just whispering about her behind her back. "Hi, everyone," she began, her voice carrying easily through the silent auditorium. "I know there's been a lot of confusion about humans lately, so I thought I'd try to explain what it's actually like being from Earth." She gestured to a holographic display showing Earth's surface. Images of mountains, oceans, and cities rotated slowly above the projector. "First, let me show you what home looks like to us," she said. "This is Earth. We call it home, but I've learned that most of you would call it a death world." Murmurs rippled through the audience as they saw the massive storms swirling over the oceans, the volcanic eruptions, the towering mountain ranges. "We don't think about the gravity," Hannah continued, reaching over to the demonstration table. "Without any apparent effort, She picked up a 50-kilogram weight with one hand. The action caused several students to gasp audibly. This feels normal to us, like picking up a book. While holding the weight, she walked to the equation board and began writing complex quantum formulas with her free hand. Her handwriting was neat and precise, showing no strain from the massive object she was casually supporting. We also don't think about the air pressure, or the oxygen levels, or the fact that our weather can kill most life forms, she said, setting the weight down, gently. To us, a thunderstorm is just rain. To you, it would be like standing inside an explosion. A tentacled student in the front row raised an appendage. How do you survive childhood? Hannah laughed, and the sound made only a few students flinch this time. Progress. We're actually pretty fragile when we're young, she explained. Human babies are helpless for years, but we adapt quickly. By the time we're teenagers, we can handle most of what Earth throws at us. What about your strength? Asked an insectoid student. The forums say you could accidentally kill us. The question brought the mood in the room down. Hannah had been dreading this topic, but she knew it needed to be addressed. That's true, she said honestly. I have to be very careful around all of you. What feels like a gentle touch to me can cause serious injury to most species, she demonstrated, by picking up a delicate crystal sculpture from the demonstration table. Her fingers held it with such careful precision that it looked like she was handling soap bubbles. I practice this every day, she said, learning to control my movements, to be aware of my strength. It's like learning to walk all over again. From the back of the room, a familiar amber glow caught her attention. Professor Thek was making his way forward, his crystalline arm now reinforced with a metallic brace that gleamed under the lights. Miss Kim, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium, I owe you an apology. The room fell completely silent. Everyone knew about the incident between them. My prejudices were unfounded, Professor Thek continued. I judged your species based on fear and ignorance. Your intelligence, your achievements, your character. None of that had anything to do with where you came from. Hannah felt a warmth spread through her chest. No worries, Professor. I understand why you were scared. Scared and stupid, he corrected himself. There's a difference. Want to see something cool? Hannah asked with a grin. Before anyone could respond, she looked toward the back of the room where Security Chief Brack stood monitoring the session. Chief Brack, would you mind helping me with another demonstration? The massive insectoid warrior clicked forward, all 300 kilograms of armored, exoskeleton and military training. Students cleared a path as he approached the front of the room. What did you have in mind? His voice rumbled. Arm wrestling? Hannah asked casually. I want to show everyone that strength doesn't have to be about violence. Chief Brack looked uncertain. Are you sure that's safe? For you? Probably not, Hannah admitted, but I promise to be gentle. They positioned themselves at the demonstration table, their hands locked together. Chief Brack's armored claw looked tiny compared to Hannah's normal human hand. The contrast was almost comical. Ready? Hannah asked. Chief Brack nodded, then applied what was clearly his full strength. His exoskeleton creaked with effort, his forearms bracing against the table for leverage. Hannah held his arm steady while continuing to talk to the audience. The thing about human strength, she said conversationally, is that we learn to control it out of necessity. If we used full force all the time on Earth, we'd break everything we touched. Chief Brack was straining visibly now, his compound eyes showing the effort he was putting in. We're not violent by nature, Hannah continued. We're actually very social creatures. We just happen to be very, very durable. With the gentlest possible movement, she pressed Chief Brack's arm down to the table. The motion was slow and controlled, more like lowering a delicate instrument than overpowering an opponent. The auditorium erupted in amazed chatter. Chief Brack, the university's ultimate symbol of security and strength, had just been defeated by a girl who looked like she was discussing the weather. How? He asked, flexing his arm to make sure it still worked. Practice, Hannah replied, and about 12 years of martial arts training. My parents thought it would teach me discipline. She turned back to the audience. That's what I want everyone to understand. Yes, humans are physically powerful. Yes, we can be dangerous if we're not careful, but we're also capable of incredible gentleness. We have to be, or we'd never survive living with each other. A student near the front raised her hand. So you're saying humans are like gentle giants? Hannah considered the phrase. I like that. We're big and strong, but we use that strength to protect things, not destroy them. Professor Theck's repaired arm caught the light as he raised it. Miss Kim, would you be willing to continue these educational sessions? I think the university would benefit greatly from learning more about human capabilities and culture. Idea. Love to, Hannah replied. But next time maybe we can also talk about human art, music and literature. We're not just about being strong. As students filed out of the auditorium, their conversations had completely changed from 2 weeks ago. Instead of fear and whispers about Deathworld monsters, Hannah heard excited discussions about human culture, strength training techniques and requests for more demonstrations. For the first time since arriving at Kepler University, she felt like she truly belonged. She was still the only human, still stronger than everyone around her, still someone who had to be careful with every movement. But now she was also a teacher, a friend, and a bridge between her world and theirs. The gentle giant from the Deathworld had found her place among the stars.